States and Canada represents approximately 364,000 plumbers, pipe fitters, sprinkler fitters, HVACR service technicians, welders, and pipeliners working in the construction industry throughout North America. The UA is present in many important sectors of our economy. Skilled UA members touch virtually every aspect of people's lives, from homes to schools to businesses, including commercial and institutional, energy and infrastructure, fabrication, fire protection, HVACR, industrial, medical and pharmaceutical, and even residential and water safety. Once you become a UA member, there are many career paths you can choose. Starting as an apprentice, the UA provides many training opportunities to grow and develop into a highly skilled journey-level worker. The training programs provide you the certifications and credentials you will need to succeed. You decide how far you will go. Become a designer, a contractor, a business owner, a foreman, or go big and help the next generation of trade workers and become an instructor, organizer, or UA official. HVAC Excellence is a proud partner of the UA, providing extended learning and career opportunities for our post-secondary and vocational students. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you once again for joining Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC show. We are so privileged to be joined by Rich Pinkowski. Rich, how are you, sir?
Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon to the audience, and thank you for joining us today. And Cliff, it's always a pleasure to have an exchange of ideas on this platform.
You know, you always spark my creativity. Every time we get into a conversation, you'll send me a topic and go, "What do you think about talking about this?" And I go, "Well, I don't know that I've ever actually talked about that. Maybe I need to learn about that." And today is exceptionally one of those topics. So I'm probably a little congested, you all. I came back from doing some traveling, brought COVID back with me and doing some recovery. So the beauty of doing virtual learning is no one has to actually sit around COVID in the air. You get to actually sit back and enjoy and listen to some professionals with some different topics. Now, the one that we're going to talk about today is so important for educators. What we recognized at our conference this last year at the National HVACR Education Conference is we had a significant number of first-year educators. So what happened with COVID? Quite a few people retired early. A lot of people transitioned from the field into education. And so we had an inrush of young educators. And I can personally vouch for myself, and I'm sure you'll say the same thing, Rich. When we transition from being a good technician into the classroom, sometimes it's difficult to understand what the balance is. Because when we worked in the field, we were good at what we did. And time management was more about how much can I work without getting in trouble at home. That was time management. And in the classroom, it's a very, very different thing. So let's talk a little bit about how to manage ourselves and understanding where limits are. That's a big thing that I'm still till this day struggling with, is understanding limits and capacity. So today we're going to talk about margin and understand a little bit about what margin is in the theory of margin. And so when you brought this up, I thought, okay, what's he pulling out of his sleeve this time? So yeah, let's dive into margin and understand a little bit better how to balance ourselves professionally.
Well, thank you for your kind words and for welcoming everybody today, Cliff. And, when an airplane takes off, the runway's longer and wider than needed to accomplish this everyday endeavor. The pilot has margin to spare. So let's look at that a little.
Right. What does that mean?
Yeah, margin is defined as a bare minimum below which, or an extreme limit beyond which, something becomes impossible or is no longer desirable. Theorists agree there's no single explanation that exists to define adult learning, but there are many models and profiles that illuminate characteristics of how adult comprehension can be augmented. And, we've got an irreducible piece in our classrooms every day. And
Yeah.
the point of departure for HVACR education will always remain rooted in one universal goal: heat transfer. Heat
Right.
will move downhill without any help. Fans, pumps, and compressors move air, water, and refrigerant uphill. Our work begins at the bottom of the hill. And as you know, Cliff, and as you learn every year with that group of attendees to the conference, you know, culturally, every HVAC instructor involved in technical training strives for the best opportunities for every learner to seek employable skill sets.
Absolutely.
But
It's what we're there for.
that's right. Are we preparing to give the right material with the right quality to the right student at the right time?
Yeah. And we
That's
see that from our organizations, we see different curriculum across the country, and it's necessary because if you lump all of your qualities of HVAC and refrigeration into one lump and go, okay, everyone teach the same thing. Well, you might go to one part of the country and go, well, we don't even have gas heat over here, or we don't even have heat pumps, or we don't really dive into these principles in this area. So it's important to understand what that looks like.
and exactly right. And emerging technologies challenge the limits that can be comprehended by the attendees who trust us. They trust us to manage the training modules. But
Right.
let's look a little beyond that too. Are the institutional resources available to us? Do they add power to our lesson plan? Does your classroom offer load reduction to the learners? So residing in our buildings are young adults trying to launch a career and a family at the same time.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
let's look at the first slide there. Picture yourself. Every instructor is in the left seat. We're the captain of the technical learning experience in the classroom.
Right.
So we want to get comfortable with that. And Cliff, you and I always agree that as an instructor in front of a classroom, you're hired to be you. When I was hired to teach at a UA local, I was hired to be Rich, not the guy before me, not somebody else that was doing other training. I was
Sure.
just hired to be me and give my perspective from my experiences. That's the greatest thing about technical training. It's your experience that enriches your students the most.
And that's scary a lot of times when we come out of the field and we go into the classroom, we imagine that we have to fit into this box. Okay, I'm learning this new career because it really is somewhat of a new career when we transition out of the technical, the technician aspect into the education aspect. We feel like, oh my, we're going to be in this new place and I need to act a certain way and I need to fit into this so that I can look like this, not realizing that we were probably hired because of our uniqueness and the unique attributes that we've gathered along the way. And that's sometimes a little bit of a mind trick for us when we get into teaching.
Well, exactly. But Cliff, let's get something off the table for this discussion right now.
Hmm.
Technology moves faster than society.
Yes.
Sustainable technology presents more complicated challenges for everyday training. Flammable refrigerants. Who
Ooh,
could
boy.
predict we're going to go to a less safe heat transfer medium? And those kind of changes are a burden to the lesson plan. But do the headlines of what's next, does that distract from our mission? Is there a headline for you, Cliff, that keeps you up at night?
Yeah, I would say for me it is, how do we how do we safely handle new refrigerants and how do we, communicate with the customers? I mean, that's a lot of change happening, particularly in residential and light commercial sectors right now.
Sure. And propane, as we know, was around 100 years ago.
It's been here forever.
It's not new, but it's in a
No,
new machine. It's
new
in a
form.
new, that's right.
Right.
It's being asked to do different things. So, today you know, let, let's have a meaningful, thoughtful process here. You and I aren't looking to tell somebody what to do or what not to do in a classroom, but we're looking for intellectual honesty as it
Yes.
relates to doing our everyday job every day.
Mhm.
So if we want to dive right into it, the theory of
Yeah.
marketing. In 1963, Howard McCluskey, University of Michigan, introduced the theory of margin. His premise analyzes the emotion and stress of adult life through a mathematical equation. In the formula, load means the self and social demands required by a person to maintain a minimum level of autonomy. But by contrast, power refers to people's resources such as abilities, possessions, allies, social construct. And McCluskey further proclaims when load continually matches or exceeds power, And if both are fixed and or out of control or reversible, the situation becomes highly vulnerable and susceptible to breakdown. So through the McCluskey lens appears a load which tests the extent of available power, putting the success of a program at risk for overload. So when uh, we look at this mathematical influence,
Right.
the presumption clearly demonstrates when load becomes larger than power, the result is greater than one. And that only means one thing. The one is you, the instructor, the students in front of us. What if their responsibilities are greater than one? That means more things to accomplish than one person can handle properly. So McCluskey doesn't address the actual act of learning, but illustrates when learning is most likely to occur. So our challenge that we all accept is to create an environment for our students. And you don't really see a lot of numbers assigned to this, and we will try to later in the conversation to
Okay.
try to put a number, but it doesn't always work that way. It's about understanding and managing the concept and the process. And we'll see here soon that there are a lot of things that impact the process that we may or may not have control of.
So really, it's a mathematical formula for success.
Right, with the goal of staying less than one, because if it's less than one person, one institution, one student can handle it. And we just had a very big challenge in the UA, as everyone did, with the pandemic.
Right.
It was one of our greatest training challenges because we're trying to help over 40,000 apprentices in our system in 300 training centers to earn journeyman status. And that means they come into the program and they earn 50% of a journeyman. They're there for 5 years learning and working. So you're learning and working at the same time. You don't get your 10% raise every year until you do a certain amount of classwork.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And luckily, not one local reported an inability to advance or graduate an apprentice through the pandemic.
Okay.
So if we look at the screen, here's what it looks like. You add power, you increase power, you release power. We started adding power back in 2010 through digital platforms with our partners at Washington Community College.
Yep.
We started building Blackboard classes and online resources. By 2017, there were 4,400 Blackboard classes available in the system.
Wow.
For the locals to use in the 300 training centers.
As part of the resources.
By the end of the pandemic, with the power increased and then released, by the end of the pandemic, we now have 15,000 Blackboard classes with over 80,000 users.
Wow.
And that number includes journeyman because, as you know,
Continuing education and
no matter how long you're in the HVAC industry, you always have to go back and touch education again.
Especially emerging technologies, new refrigerants. There's a lot to maintain.
Or even 15 years or so ago, who imagined the variable flow refrigerant world
Yeah,
we live in?
exactly.
Or you spoke of earlier some of the ECM technologies. As it evolves, even though it's still all heat transfer, then we must continue to stay connected to training resources. So when you look at the theory of margin overall, and we can apply it across the training spectrum, how do we determine which is ours really to manage? Because students have margins, we have margins as instructors, but so do your program managers and facility directors. So
Sure. We've all got responsibilities to maintain.
Exactly. So with those margins to watch, let's just take a few minutes to look at some external and internal impacts that can occur to our lesson plans. And when you look at the list, I'm sure you could, and the audience could add several more bullet points, but some of the leading indicators of new technology and job market. I mean, we have candidates that come to us and the HVAC experts say, I want to be a service tech. Good. You're 20. Before you retire, you will be immersed in an IT field, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You hear that. You may not want to hear that, but with all the data harvesting going Oh, buddy.
Yeah, it's part of it. And speaking of all of our participants, everyone let us know where you're joining from. It's important to see how broad our HVAC and refrigeration community is. I'm chiming in from Brownsburg, Indiana. Rich, where are you at today?
I'm in East Palestine, Ohio, and
Right.
nobody before February 3rd and the train derailment,
Right.
nobody knew there 5,000 people live in East Palestine. And I'm
That
not making
kind of
it's a serious thing. Things are moving on, but we're not. That's a headline you're not seeing anymore.
yeah,
Thank God.
yeah, absolutely. Put you on the radar for a little bit.
Yeah, but things are better, and they're and as they will be. So we have somebody here from New Jersey.
Absolutely. Paul, thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, we'll probably have quite a few educators on today.
Mount Prospect. Why? Well, headquarters is in Mount Prospect, right? So
Absolutely, it is. There's our Lisa joining in right there.
Big Brother's watching us.
That's right.
All right. So, and then we also look at some biases that they may bring in, and peer pressure is part of it too. So, eh, let's take a snapshot of today's world. Look at the top line and look at the bottom line. What's the primary difference? What's the difference you think between the top row and the bottom row?
Wow.
The top line is bricks and mortar.
Yeah,
That's it.
absolutely. So it's the availability of digital technology.
Right. So analog takes a lot longer to build airports and build cars and electrical grid than it does to offer digital resources.
Okay.
So that adds to the load, right? That's part of the load, but it's also part of the power. Look at the speed of technology. This graph is a little old, so when we're seeing 231 million emails every minute
Right.
around the world, it's probably more than that now.
Yeah,
And
I get
I,
that.
and I said we weren't going to talk about headlines, but AI is going to increase that blinding speed.
Yeah,
So
and so that's something that can affect that power and load and understanding what kind of an effect it is so that we can understand how to rebalance our efforts.
right. So as part of that balance, we as instructors, I don't want to stay too much on data and/or technology, but it is part of our burden to navigate.
Yeah,
Right. We got to make some determinations here, and so we observe and we react to what's in the windshield. You know, data is equals currency. That's not a new idea. Over 10 years ago, Clive Humby made headlines when he declared data is the new oil.
yeah,
And that's a great metaphor because, like oil in its raw form, data is almost useless, right?
true.
If you refine it, turn
It
it
has to
into
be
something,
processed.
yeah. If you refine it, it becomes more valuable. With the amount of data being produced today, we're all sitting on a big pile of untapped wealth.
Yeah, I
No
mean,
question.
we ourselves are all data points right now. If you don't realize that, every time we gain information, every time we search, every time we join, every time we participate, we become data that can be used for another purpose. And so that does make a lot of sense.
And former DOE Secretary Moniz in 2016 predicted that every darn thing will be connected to every other darn thing. And he was about the Internet of
It's
Things.
pretty simplified.
We'd love to hear his version on AI with that. But he was exactly correct. It's all connected. And then I want to also bring into the conversation what happened to the HVAC industry in January of 2014. To me, it was a disruption, a huge disruption, and we're living and navigating that disruption now. Any thoughts? Any ideas?
January of
Or
14.
even anybody in the audience, you want to
Yeah,
post a
anyone thinking what happened January
what
of
happened in January?
14? I would
So while people are on their iPhones Googling January
I
2014,
yeah, all right. So it has to be something to do with the delivery of information.
well, Google bought Nest.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. Now we're
Why?
getting there.
Why does Google need Nest?
Yeah.
Who won it? If you
Give
remember
a
back then, 10 years ago, Nest was a digital version of Honeywell T87F.
absolutely it was.
100% on, 100% off.
Yep.
Fan 100% on,
Yep.
100% off. Turn things on and off.
Just switches.
So what did Google buy?
Input.
Data. That's
That's
correct.
right.
Bingo.
Mhm.
They bought data. So when you connected to a Nest thermostat and everybody's phones are connected, that thermostat knows how many people are in the house, how many people left, how many people are on their way home. And gee, your automatic temperature resets automatic, truly automatic. When the house is empty, that Nest thermostat will turn you down. And when it starts to load up, but Nest wasn't satisfied with just your phone and your comfort conditions. My dishwasher still wants to meet and shake hands with Alexis.
Yeah, that's so true.
Not my house. But see, now I just revealed to the audience and you my bias, where the candidates that come into our classrooms, they live with that information flow. They
Sure.
could they could have the garage door go up and down when
Feels
they're a
normal
mile.
to them.
That's right. They could be at the supermarket, click on their LG refrigerator, and see what's in the refrigerator.
Yeah.
So that's part of the fabric that we're living with now.
Oh, I've had to adapt to it. They've grown up with it. I mean, even my own little studio right here, that's just part of my interconnectability. I mean, hey,
Right.
Google, turn the lights off in the shop.
Yeah, exactly. So our students today, have an expectation that we can exist in two places at once, inside the classroom and outside the classroom, because they communicate with everyone that's important in their life through ones and zeros.
Right.
So if you're not important to your students, then you're invisible. You're not going to be there if you're not important. So that's a key thing. And what one last thing about some external impacts, and I want to give a shout out to someone else that'll be at your conference for the UA and uh, having a workshop too. Probably is going to be Special Rep Laura Seha.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, in this conversation, Laura, who has a lot of training experience herself, when she was a plumbing inspector for the
Mhm.
city of Los Angeles, she did training for them, but the importance of the variables that are present in adult learning. So when you look at the variables, and a lot of the variables have to do with when the technology comes out, how soon it ends up in your classroom, or how soon it ends up in your building, or how soon it ends up in a service truck. And according to Newcastle University, the theoretical model of unified theory of acceptance and use of technology is determined by behavioral intention. So those are the biases we just mentioned, the behavioral intention of your students and perceived likelihood of adopting technology dependent on a direct effect of four constructs: performance expectations, effort expectancy of how much do I want you, Cliff, to engage? How much am I
Right.
going to put on your phone that when you leave my classroom, you thought you were maybe done? But there's an upside to that too, and we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
Social influence, and facilitating conditions. So there's another. That brings us to another common thread. Uh, that is diffusion of innovation. And that theory explains the rate at which people will adopt a new product or service.
Right.
So let's go back to the 60s. In 62, E.M. Rogers described four main elements of diffusion: innovation, which is a practice perceived as new by an individual. The second element is communication channels. For Rogers, communication is a process which participants create and share information with one another in order to reach a mutual understanding. Does that sound
Sounds
familiar?
it sounds very familiar in today's age.
Is that our everyday work, to communicate information and share? The third is time. The time aspect is mostly ignored in research, but it argues time dimension in research in diffusion illustrates one of its strengths. Last element, the social system is the last element in the diffusion process. And Rogers defined social system as a set of interrelated units, students,
Right.
engaged in joint problem solving to accomplish a common goal. Again,
Yeah.
that's the core element for us. But diffusions take place in a social system. It is influenced by the social structure of the social system. For Rogers, structures at patterned arrangements of the units in a system. So patterned arrangements of students coming to class, doing their lessons, and what other outside influence because he further claimed the nature of the social system affects individuals' innovativeness, which is the main criterion for categorizing technology adoption. So think about the ecosystem in your classroom.
Hmm.
When the door is closed and you're exchanging ideas and methodology, you've got your own social structure there.
Oh, absolutely.
So those are some interesting things to think about as we look to uh, analyze some of the process. One thing out of our purview probably is bandwidth. Is your facility connected? If it is connected, what's the strength of the bandwidth? But that connectivity is normalized now, and it's also expected. But one thing we don't know is how a student is connected outside of the training facility. We assume everybody has a phone in their pocket.
Right. That was one of the things that I encountered when we went into March of 2020. So I was going to be doing a live class at the National HVACR Education Conference on virtual classrooms, how to establish your content in a virtual setting using cameras, using mics, just exactly like we're doing right now. And some of the pushback that I got was even in 2020, early 2020, and not a lot of the classrooms were actually connected to bandwidths that were fast enough to provide audio and video connections to their students. And so they had to struggle. They had to really rush to be able to get their programs up to date to where they could actually connect and merge the students that were remote and the educators that were remote, but potentially even with educators that were in the classroom, because some educators were allowed to come into the classroom to do hands-on demonstrations to broadcast out. And so I had teachers that were working on that, getting their classrooms set up. They were setting up cameras just to find out that they didn't have enough connectability to even make that happen.
And that's one of the biggest fears when we're doing instructor development for the instructor training program, and even at the local level, is that having the confidence in the technology to work.
Right.
But let me lay everybody's fears right now. Your screen is going to go black. Someday, at some point,
Someday.
your screen is going to go black. It will. So you can either tap dance your way out of it, or while you can ask one of your students who's accelerating themselves to come up and say, "Hey, I'm going to talk about heat transfer while you put the lights back on."
Yeah.
So we shouldn't have a fear, because in the community, in your ecosystem of the classroom, we all have that technology. We all worry about the technology working and not failing us. But just as a compressor is going to lose a winding at some point,
Eventually it's going
light bulb, yeah, in your projector, so is your computer chip. Something's not going to work. And then, as you said about different classrooms, when you go into different classrooms, now you're on different systems. So when our teachers teach at home, they take their stick, they go to Ann Arbor to teach at Washington Community College. You're on a different system, a different version of PowerPoint. Seamless integration, as we know, is not seamless.
No,
Just ask any chiller tech, right?
absolutely.
Person doesn't always talk to training.
That's right. And network doesn't necessarily mean an open network.
Yeah. So yeah, that's why I wanted to bring it into this discussion to kind of let everybody understand that when the expectation of things being normalized, that doesn't guarantee they always work.
Okay, that's fair.
Yes. So, but we can't forget one thing, and one thing only. Training still looks like this. We're immersed in a high-performance built environment with expectations for the availability of high-skilled labor.
Sure.
That's what contractors are looking at, getting some high-skilled labor into their trucks. So yes, we're still a hands-on population. We build, we service, we maintain high-performance infrastructure. That again, like heat transfer, is another irreducible piece. So that's something that's still core and irreducible to our lesson plans, and it's important never to lose sight of that. And here's another disruption that I would like to offer, and what could be another bias. And this is one last comment on external biases a new candidate may bring into your classroom. If they participated in a robotics program as early as middle school and high school, you may have some students in your classroom that if they didn't do this, they'd have no idea, no concept of that
Construction,
didn't know
mechanics.
that they wanted to be in your classroom to learn how to build, maintain, and service things.
Sure.
Because those programs are so well, they're so mature and well-rounded that the team is full of people, somebody that programs, somebody that knows how to use a screwdriver and a wrench and build a robot. Somebody else goes out and they to the business community and has to sell. So there's customer skills that they have to learn because you can't build a robot without money. So the robotic teams literally have to go and promote their goals
Yeah,
and get
absolutely.
people to engage with them. So if somebody walks into your room and they had robotics in high school or middle school, great. They're going to
Right
be
candidate.
they're going to be a good resource for you in the class. But you know what? This was such an unexpected thing when you face it. When you face that coming in, it changes the dynamics of your room, of your classroom. It does. So that's been exciting to watch, and I just wanted to kind of salt that in here.
No, that's a very important one. So when we think about our prospects for students, we think about what we traditionally look as prospects for HVAC and refrigeration programs. We don't always look at things like the robotics side, but Howard Weiss mentions this all the time. The advancements of technology is not just for us, it's happened for every level for students. So we see a lot of these robotic developments and even Lego robotic developments in middle school and high school. And those are students and people that would be very interested in our trade. So when we're scouting for enrollees in our programs, I think it's important to look for those potential attributes.
Yes, I mean the VOAG programs were always great farm teams for us. They have uh, program VOAG does trade teaching in 12,000 school systems across the country. But now with emerging technology, we have this emerging group that has really taken it to the next level.
Mm.
That they're just not learning one specific skill, either how to weld or how to wire. They're getting a full bore discussion on building something, making it run, and communicating it, which is important for service things.
Yeah, sounds like us.
Yeah, so let's look inward a little bit to some internal
Okay.
impact. Um, Self-accelerated learning. When you lean forward into that, there's Davidson Institute came up with 12 reasons why it's not accepted. And reason number 7 jumped out at me. It's like it's bad to push, but self-acceleration in today's world of ones and zeros and devices in your pockets and devices every time you turn around, it's going to happen with or without our guidance.
Yeah,
These will
absolutely.
self-accelerate. When we have classes on Blackboard and we have certain expectations and outcomes, we may have a class of 15 service techs and 3 of them may be 3 or 4 chapters ahead. Should we curb that and say, oh no, wait a minute, now you don't want to get ahead of your peers over here, but why not allow them to self-accelerate because they want to and because they're sitting maybe at a job trailer, and instead of doing the crossword at lunchtime, they're doing work on their phone. What a wonderful thing.
It is. I actually just did a class on this at the ACCA conference last Tuesday, talking about the different generations of learners. And a lot of people don't realize, especially us Gen Xers, don't realize that the educational design actually changed for most of our schools, especially high schools, in the 1990s. And we
Yeah.
moved from a linear educational program. Because if Rich, you and I grew up, we learned a book. Say we had a content we wanted to learn. We didn't move to the next chapter until we were successful at completing the previous one and we had tested at the same time that everyone else tested. And then we were allowed to move on to the next chapter. And we were penalized for moving ahead because the educator wasn't ready to move ahead yet. And we moved into a modular design of education. And so a lot of our high school programs now are staged in a modular format so that you can move ahead. You can move backwards. The assignment doesn't always have to be completed for every student on the exact same day. There is a wider opportunity to be able to complete those tasks. And so it's became much more modular than what we would have understood in education from 20 years ago. And so as new educators, we have to understand that the way our generations are learning now looks differently than you and I are comfortable with in many aspects. And this is exactly where that comes into play.
Well, but Cliff, that just speaks directly to the student, helping the student manage their own margin.
Yes.
That they can, that they know if they have a busy week next week, well, this weekend, I'm going to get a few things done, then that takes some pressure off me at
Yep.
school.
Absolutely.
So that is really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. So the questions for us is, if we want to manage the message, do we want to manage the acceleration into a vector of mutual benefit for the instructor and the students and in the classroom? Because if, to me, it can be at some level harmful to tell a student, don't work ahead, don't look ahead.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, when we had books, we didn't just read up to the page we were on, we all flipped to the back, right? So this is the same
Uh-oh.
thing. There's no harm there. So I think it's something that can be embraced in the classroom. And if we as instructors are a little uncomfortable, I mean, that's for us to learn inside of our margins, because that challenge is to unleash the incoming talent through multi-platform engagement. Steve Jobs had a very eloquent perspective on that. Technology is nothing. What important is that you have faith in people, that they are basically good and smart. And if you give them tools, they'll do wonderful things with them.
Boy, that's a powerful statement right there. I would say that Generation Z is an entire generation built on this principle.
Yes, exactly. And what he's saying is to trust those students in front of you in the classroom, and because they're trusting you to guide, so we want to trust them with that information. And Steve is encouraging us to allow wonderful things to happen.
Yeah,
In our lives.
and be open to new learning styles. And so that level of margin is, you're right. Sometimes we have to look at our own expectations of the student and understand that our level of margin may look different than a younger student's, because they may be able to find information faster than we would anticipate. I did one of the examples in the classroom that I had multiple generations in the classroom. And I asked each generation, how fast do you think that you could find me on LinkedIn? And my youngest students, Gen Z, said about 23 seconds. I'm like, boy, that's that's pretty specific. And I would say that you're probably accurate. And
Yeah.
so we need to understand what those comfort levels are, so we know what margin actually looks like.
No, exactly. So we've been talking about a lot of aspects and
I don't
impacts.
know if I'm rich.
With that,
There you are. Did you lose me or did I lose you?
I don't know. Something went wow, wow, wow. For a minute there, I sounded like Charlie Brown's parents. Wah wah. Anyway, let's move into ground zero in our classroom, our lab, our shop. When you look out into the room, how long and wide is your runway? Is everybody going to take off and land safely inside this lesson plan, inside the thought? And for us as instructors, some of the things we do that may occur because, number one, we're human. Number two, maybe we've been teaching a lot of the same materials for a lot of sessions, a lot of years. And there could be, if we look at four different areas of attitude, behavior, task, and environment, there's a lot of moving parts there. And the way our outreach into the classroom and the way things are interpreted by the student may not be the same way as we intended. Just like when people say, I don't like the text because there's no context. If I text you something, you don't know if I'm happy or sad.
Exactly.
In the classroom, we're right there. We're brutally honest with them in the classroom. So if there's things that we either disorganized or we're not looking them right in the eye and saying, look, here's what it is, here's what it isn't, How can I help you get comfortable with that? Or, even something as simple as giving them the guidelines for evaluation. How often do we talk about expectations? So if when you look at a lot of this, even the environment, comfort in the environment, desks and chairs, noise from neighboring classrooms, even though we may be used to that because we've been next to that classroom for 10 years and they're always noisy. The welders are always grinding, right? But
Right.
you're next to you're going to have grinders all day and all night. So those are things I might be used to, but for the
But
student,
the student may not.
yeah. So, but then we may have overlooked that as part of the environment that we're trying to create with
Mm,
that. Does that make sense?
it does.
So, but the good thing is more than half the students, we would remind you that they say their teacher has helped them during a difficult time.
Mm,
Now, if you unpack that, it may not be a difficult time in the classroom, but when you look at McCluskey's load and power definitions, they may have a load at home they're trying to manage. And one of the happier, things a young student may have at home is just married, wife's expecting, or he's just had a child, or maybe a second child. And by having, as you mentioned, those training modules set up for acceleration or even deceleration, they're going to remember that as how Cliff set them up to succeed, not set them up to fail. They didn't walk in and say, I don't care how many diapers you had to change, you owe me an assignment tonight.
right. So it gives us the opportunity to look at the load a little bit, not just our load, but our students' load, and give some flexibility in the way that they're managing that.
Okay, but then now did we transfer the load from a student back onto the instructor? Does that give us an imbalance? Is that fair for us? We can't solve everybody's everyday problems.
Right.
We can't. But what we can do is allow them to have their space and allow them to have their autonomy. McCluskey brought that up too, or was it Rogers that says that communication allows the students to have autonomy, that social structure is autonomy they need in the classroom. They still need to have an identity in the classroom. Where some people are going to be best at figuring out chilled water temperatures or heat loss or loss through a roof or an open door. Everybody brings something to their peers that they can share with them that's helpful, that has mutual benefit.
Sure, absolutely. And Lisa brings up a good point. When we're trying to look at our classrooms for balancing even special needs, it gives us the opportunity to look at our margin and evaluate the needs of our students and the capabilities of our programs.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of things there that we can that probably do small minor tweaks, or just even if we're comfortable with the way our attitude is or our behavior in the class,
Yeah.
but just reminding ourselves in front of the class about attitude, behavior, or the task or the environment. If we just have that a little bit in the front of our mind, then that will help us keep the students in a comfortable spot and safe spot. You
Okay.
know, and again, it's all about the environment for learning. That's all uh, what a lot of the biggest concerns are. So here's the big question:
Here we go.
if we
To get
want
to
to
the meat and potatoes.
we want to minimize instructor load. What's been suggested from a lot of the research I looked at, and I thought, gosh, I've never done this. And after teaching, I've been in front of the UA, involved in training since 1980. I have never done this. I don't know if I'm prepared to do this, or if I have the personal tools to do this. But here's the big question: is there a benefit to your students to be transparent about managing load and power? Can we trust our students to process this process? Or will this help initiate unguarded conversations about meeting the students' goals? So when you say acknowledge that concept of margin exists in your students, understand the concerns on the content of the course, acknowledge and contribute to that as instructors we're contributing to the load. So, in the first class, before you even know who's in front of you, do we address the issue of margin during the first class meeting? Does that level of honesty with our students make you uncomfortable?
Hmm. I would say that that is an incredibly important question to ask ourselves as educators. Because I can
Yeah.
tell you from studying our generations that particularly Gen Z and especially Alpha, who's coming up, behind Gen Z, the generations themselves are much more open to conversation and they are much more inclusive and they're very responsive to validation. So they don't want this is the course and this is the expectations. They really would like to know, okay, this is the course, this is the content, this is why we need the content. And let's talk about what some of the expectations are of the educator and of the students right up front. And they truly enjoy that right up front on day one because it clarifies so many things down the road. So we have the potential for reducing some of that load right up front if we're honest about it and bring it up, like you said, in day one.
Oh,
Hmm.
exactly. And if it makes us uncomfortable, we probably should. But that's okay because that level of and it doesn't mean that on your second night or after you give your first assignment, I don't think you want to walk into the classroom and say, okay, is this class too hard for you? Because
That's right.
there's a little bit of disrespect in there, I think, to say, am I making this too tough? Come on, you know,
Yeah.
yeah. There, that may send there may not be unguarded conversations, but as you said, on the path to validation, you're building trust.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
validation is filled with trust if they're asking you for it. And I don't mean pandering. I don't mean saying, "Oh, that solder joint you made on that compressor, that is amazing. That's fantastic." No, they're expected to make that solder joint. But if you're seeing that they're understanding and comprehending, and maybe they go to the next station and help peer to peer have a conversation to help somebody make a better solder joint or understand a suction reading, that's something you may want to compliment and validate. Like, wow, I didn't ask you to help me teach, but that's where the magic is. To me, in a classroom, when before the end of the class, if they're talking more to each other than they are to me, especially a lab, that's golden.
Yeah, absolutely it
Yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah. So uh, there's a lot of things there in that question of whether or not you have the conversation, how soon, but the earlier you may reveal a bias. You may have a robotics student, talk about, hey, you only have 3 lesson plans loaded on your Blackboard site. How about putting up 6? I'm through those already. That's not to make somebody else feel bad, but you're hearing about a bias somebody may have on their expectation.
Hmm.
You know, how else do you get expectations uncovered if we don't ask the tough questions that we're uncomfortable with? Because we're not uncomfortable with a question.
Right.
We're afraid of what the answer might be.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah, so because we're human too. We're
We are
human.
human too.
You know, I I don't want somebody's because sometimes you have somebody uninterested in your class, but they have to take it. But that could cause them to have a reflexive reaction, a knee jerk of saying, "I don't know why I'm here. I can do everything else I need to graduate. I'm not sure why I'm in front of you."
Mhm.
And that kind of honesty, again, now you have somebody being honest with you. So now you have an opportunity to say, you know what, after class, or let's talk, or let's take a break, and you and I will just talk. So then you can get one on one with somebody who just posed a real issue to you. And that's a rare in the classroom too. But when you get there, if that student doesn't trust you more when you detach, then you had the wrong conversation with
I had a conversation with an educator just a few weeks ago, and they actually set the expectations on day one of what they expect out of the students, but then they ask all the students individually what their expectations are and what they think their capabilities are so they can get an understanding of what the load limit is of the students on day one, mechanically. understanding what they are capable of, and have the conversation up front as what the expectations are going to be from the instructor going forward. So the student had the chance to look at their own balance, look at their own, and understand what margin actually would look like for them. And so that brings in an interesting perspective of that margin of capability.
Well, that technique, and I'm going to write that down because that technique is the essence of what this whole conversation is about.
That I'm seeing that. And that's why it sparked that whole conversation, because it was a concept that I completely relate to, but I can't say that I've practiced it that well. I always like to know at the beginning of a class, what is your skill level? What is your capability? If we're going into a brazing class, should be an understanding of what is the expectations of the student. What do they think they're going to learn? What am I planning on teaching you? What is your capabilities, so that you know how much you're going to need to learn? And then I can give you opportunities to learn additional if you want to learn outside of this classroom, but knowing what those expectations are throughout the entire process. So it's a different way of looking at your almost your class syllabus as a pre-syllabus, but we can analyze the outcome together.
Well, but at the same time, that 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 pushes the instructor to be a little more flexible in content. And when if we're going to be intellectually honest with each other, we've all taught classes several years in a row, or taught items, or taught conferences or workshops. Every year was a different audience, so that meant every year was kind of a different flavor.
Every class, absolutely it is.
We're going to admit that to ourselves. Every year was kind of a different flavor to it.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean the last one was poor, or less, less of an experience. It just means that you, as a presenter, were able to capture the audience's need for certain types of information over others. Where you spent 5 minutes on something last year, but 20 minutes on it this year because you
Right.
needed to. I mean, that's a great way to feel comfortable in your own skin when you're teaching from your own experience.
Mhm. Yeah, indeed. Okay.
All right, so let's take a quick peek. We said
Yeah.
Husky didn't assign values, but we live on data in the classroom too.
Yeah, for
We
sure.
always ask, what's the most common question in an HVACR 2-year term or 5-year term course? If that, then this. If it's 40 degrees
Mhm.
outside, the boiler temperature only needs to be 120. It doesn't need to be 80. If we do, if that, then this all day long. And
Yeah.
sometimes my kids got tired of trying to answer that question. But McCluskey, when he was asked what the goal is, he said between zero point 0.3 and zero point 0.8 to keep life manageable. Well, that sounds great because that's less than one. So he's saying that that's still the outcome you want. So, but what are the target areas? How to identify measurable metrics?
Right. What's my
Yeah,
values?
exactly. And then how do we overcome some of the intrinsic biases when we try to calculate that? Is that even possible? How do the values offer an unbiased reflection of classroom reality? So we talked about attitude, behavior, task, environment, and I started putting 1, 2, 3, 4, and I thought, okay, what's on the power side? Connectivity, lighting, or uh, tools to use in the labs. All of that is relative to your class. Cliff and Rich can't sit here and say, make attitude a 1 or make behavior a 5 or task a 3. That wouldn't be fair to you or your students, but that's something through the discussions with your students you can arrive at. And as you stated about the example you used was the goals were stated first, and then their expectations were compared to second. That is the true load power uh, equation. So then, in that moment in time, in front of that classroom with those expectations and those concerns, you're going to arrive at your number. But the beauty of it is, the earlier you have that conversation, the more time you have to make sure you're less than 1.
Okay. It completely makes sense. Absolutely. Yeah, because if we set an expectation, but we aren't focused on what the potential outcome is, and we just assume something, then we're assuming the outcome as well. We're not mathematically looking at success.
Correct.
We're assuming success.
And again, this isn't about saying, hey, don't spend so much time on scroll compressors because variable speeds, or this, or wait a minute, ECM fans have to do this. Don't worry about the specific content. Worry about the flow of your lesson plan, and worry about looking at and maybe trying to figure out how accelerated learners can be satisfied, and also how to make sure everybody stays with you to accomplish your lesson plan goals. So it's always a challenge uh, as we look at and try to create that think and do culture. Because when that student's out of your class, he's in that truck, he's in front of a customer, he's in front of a chiller, he's on a rooftop, and it's 100 degrees outside, and he's got to get the compressor turned over. We everything that he appreciated, that he or she, that student appreciated learning from you in the classroom, when that's a successful service call, that's the think and do culture that emerges from all of our collective hard work. But before we run out of time, we want to talk about the most important person. Let's go back to the person in the left seat of that airplane.
That's right.
And
co-pilot ready to roll.
We're going to move away from system analysis and ask ourselves to evaluate our margin in life. But here's a good question. How many of you think you have too much time to prepare your lesson plan? Right?
I doubt there's anyone out there on that one.
And if teaching is a part-time job for you and your day job works overtime or through the weekend, whoops, you just had time, you just had margin load added and power taken away from your class. So, or you hold a national conference. How many of your presenters, teach nationally and locally at the same time? Or is that national presentation the second or third responsibility for many of us? So how does somebody know when to say when? Cliff, you for the many hats you wear with HVAC Excellence and ESCO, and trying to predict what's next for all of us, how do you know when to say when? What advice would you want to offer our audience here?
When you evaluate the load and minimize the margin. Because once we exceed that margin, once we have no margin left, then our pendulum is starting to swing. So
okay, so here's 4 scenarios for you. Let's keep this simple, straightforward.
Yeah.
We look at the margin categories of being in balance, having margin, in crisis, or barely able to take a breath.
Oh.
So adults are driven by both the need for self-preservation and for self-improvement. We can't deny that. Especially those of us that teach. Adults with margin in life will have the motivation to pursue self-improvement endeavors. And as stewards of the delivery system, we must manage the margin for our students and ourselves. So it's okay to leave margin for our own undertakings. It is. Because that's part of our doing our everyday job every day. So if you want to be in balance, low load, load power. Does that mean maybe instead of going to 10 conferences this year because it's self-improvement, we go to 6 or we go to 5? Or low load, high power, does going to a conference, especially HVAC Excellence, does that mean we're going to bring power back with us? Because we've learned from the peers in our classroom and from industry experts, we've learned from the horse's mouth, the manufacturers are telling us, here's what we need for our systems to run. Can you deliver that in your classroom? You're the delivery system. Can you deliver this message on behalf of Daikin, on behalf of Mitsubishi, on behalf of Johnson? Can you carry this back for us? So conferences add power also. It's a matter of looking at what's coming toward us and preparing ourselves to be prepared for our students. Once we cross the other side of high load and low power, or high load, high power, the beauty is that whenever we fall into one category, it's not a life sentence because we're managing it.
But it gives us an opportunity to evaluate it. I think that's the important part, because so many of us would look at balance as more of a load or a power individually and not look at the ratio of the two of them together. And that really makes you, at least makes me think a little bit more about my own personal balance. Am I looking at my load? And am I looking at my power as well? Because many of us will look at load and evaluate the situation by load. This is what I have. This is how much I can handle. If I add a little bit more, I won't be able to handle it. Or could we? If we understood what the power was that was driving towards that load, we might be able to increase the power
Yes. So
to get the same balance.
I'd kind of like to put a bookend on this with Alvin Eugene Toffler, who's an American writer, futurist, a businessman known for his works discussing modern technologies, including the digital revolution and communication revolution, with emphasis on the effects of the cultures. He's regarded as one of the world's outstanding futurists. He was born in 1928, and he understood that the digital revolution, he lived till 2016, but he described three forms of power: violence, wealth, and knowledge, with knowledge as the ultimate form of power that can be used to acquire the other two. And his
Right.
statement, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So let's forgive ourselves for what we learned in the past and what we may want to forget about the past, and make sure we are always poised to learn and relearn. Because once we do that as instructors, accomplish learning and relearning, the biggest benefit of that is to our students.
Absolutely. Well, and it raises our power to bring our load and power ratio back into a, hopefully, more comfortable place. Less than one.
No,
Wow. All right, boy, that went really deep. I should have mentioned that at the beginning of this class, that this is not a 1,000-foot view of ourselves. This is a 1-inch view of where we are as individuals, as educators, and even potentially as students. If we're all
but
technically in that learning stage.
it's okay to celebrate our status as educators. It's
Yeah,
okay. We don't need pats on the back. We don't need letters from former students. We know that, if we can get the right information to the right student of the right quality at the right time, that's the best opportunity. That's their best opportunity. And we can only hope that they can carry it forward and have a good life. The trades are a good life.
oh, it's been great for
Our
me.
families have had nice lives. We go on vacations. We manage our own power by taking care of our family.
Sure.
Let's once in a while just sit back and say, "Wow, that was fun," or "That class was good." But you know what? The next class, I think I may add this, and that's okay. You're in the left seat. Do what you need to do, right?
That is so true. All right. Wow. Any questions? Anyone have any questions that they'd like to bring into Rich while we're here? Any comments about it? And I hope that it is very thought provoking. I hope that you take a minute and you step back and think, I've never really evaluated my own load and my own power to see where I am as an educator, where my program is. And I encourage you to, if you want to learn more about this, you need to join us. Rich and many other members of the UA are going to be joining us at the 2024 National HVACR Education Conference in March. That'll be March 25th through the 27th, 2024. And we're going to be diving deeper into these kind of professional classes. So as educators, we have the responsibility to ourselves and to our students to learn more about power and reducing load by increasing power and finding our own new margin.
Well, and thank you for bringing up the conference. I appreciate the opportunity to take a deeper dive actually into this subject.
Mm-hmm.
Monday morning, we're going to do a workshop, and I'm hoping to have peer-to-peer conversations in the room. And I know I'll be a little bit uncomfortable. I'm going to ask some uncomfortable questions, but please be unafraid. That conference is one of the safest places for all of us to relate to those that are doing the same thing we're doing at home.
Absolutely.
So I look forward to seeing everybody there. I think it's always a great experience, and you always come back with more tools in your toolbox than when you went with. So thank you for having me out there. I appreciate the consideration by HVAC Excellence.
Absolutely. We're very honored to have you there. We hope you all join us. We hope that you spend more time with us every week here on Did You Know? And tell your friends about it and make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Turn on notifications so that you can get notified when we go live every week. And we have amazing educators, professionals from the industry like Rich Minkowski. And we look forward to talking to you all next week. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you then on Did You Know? The ESCO HVAC show. Bye, Rich.
All right, are we out?